entirely as a politician.
As a politician, he was never a Mahatma, and I refuse to call him Mahatma. I've never in my life called him Mahatma. He doesn't deserve that title. Not even from the point of view of his morality. You see? I always say that as I met Mr. Gandhi in the capacity of an opponent, I have a feeling that I know him better than most other people because he had opened his real fangs to me, you see, and I could see the inside of the man. You see, while others who generally went there as devotees, you see, saw nothing of him except the external appearance which he had put up as a Mahatma. But I saw him in his human capacity, the bare man in him. Gandhi has already vanished from the memory of the people in this country. His memory is kept up because the Congress party annually, if he gives a holiday, either on his birthday or some other day connected with some event in his life, and has a celebration. Naturally, people's memory is revived. But if these artificial respirations were not given, I think Gandhi would be long forgotten.
Fundamentally changed.
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, he was all the time double dealing. He conducted two papers. One in English, the Harijan, you see. And before that, Young India. And in Gujarati, he conducted another paper, you see, which is called the Deen Bandhu, or something like that. Now, if you read the two papers, you will see how Mr. Gandhi was deceiving the people. In the English paper, he posed himself as an opponent of the caste system and of untouchability, you see, and that he was a Democrat. But if you read his Gujarati magazine, you see, you will see him a more orthodox man. He has been supporting the caste system, the Varnashram Dharma, and all the orthodox dogmas, you see, which has kept India down. In fact, somebody ought to write Mr. Gandhi's biography by making a comparative study of the statements made by Mr. Gandhi in his Harijan and the statements made by Mr. Gandhi in this Gujarati paper. There are 7 volumes of it. The people, the Western world only reads the English paper, where Mr. Gandhi, in order to keep himself in the esteem of the Western people who believe in democracy, was advocating democratic ideals. But you got to see also what he actually taught to the people in his vernacular paper. Nobody seems to have made any reference. All the biographies that have been written of him, you see, are based upon his Harijan and the Young India, but not upon the Gujarati writings of Mr. Gandhi. He has no dynamics in him, you see. All this talk about untouchability was just for the purpose of making the untouchables drawn into the Congress. That was one thing, you see. And secondly, you see, he wanted that the untouchables should not oppose his movement, you see, of Swaraj. I don't think beyond that he had any real motive of uplift. You see, he wasn't like Garrison in the United States, who fought for the Negroes.
Going back to the Poona Pact, the Yoravda Pact.
Yes.
Can you remember a little of what Gandhi said to you and what you said to him?
Oh, I know it very well. I know it very well. The British government had, in the original award which MacDonald had given, had accepted my suggestion. I said, look here, the Hindus want that there should be a common electorate, so that there will be no separatist feeling between the scheduled caste and the Hindus. We think that if you have a common electorate, we would be submerged, and the nominees of the scheduled caste who would be elected would be really slaves of the Hindus, not independent people. Now, I told Mr. Ramsay MacDonald that this is a sort of a thing that he might do. Give us a separate electorate. Give us a separate electorate, and also give us a second vote in the general election, so that Gandhi cannot say that we are separated in point of election. First of all, my contention was this, that for 5 years we live separately from the Hindus, with no kind of intercourse or intercommunication, you see, of a social or a spiritual sort. What can one day's cycle of participation in a common electorate do to remove this hardened crust of separatism which has grown for centuries? It's a foolish thing to think that if two people vote together, you see, in a common polling booth, that their hearts are going to change. It's nothing of the kind. Mr. Gandhi has got this madness in him. Well, let this be satisfied by this kind of a system. Give the untouchables 2 votes and give them a population representation of ratio, so that the weightage would be in terms of votes and not in terms of representatives, so that the Gandhi and others may not complain. That Ramsay MacDonald accepted. The award was really my suggestion. I wrote to him a letter from Naples that this is what I would like him to do, you see, so that there may be no trouble. This is exactly what he did. You see, gave us a separate electorate and also a vote in the general electorate. But Gandhi didn't want that we should send our 2 representatives. Therefore, he didn't want the separate electorate part of the award, and went on fast. Then they all came to me and said, well, the British government said, if he agrees to abandon the award, then we have no objection. But we can't abandon the award ourselves. We have given the award, we have taken all things into consideration, and we think this is the basis. You have to read Ramsay MacDonald's letter. It's a very clear statement that we haven't done anything to aggravate the separation. In fact, we are trying to bridge it up by bringing the 2 sections together in a common electoral roll. But Gandhi's object was that we should not get a free, independent representative. Therefore, in the first place, he said, no representation ought to be given to us. That's how his stand in the Round Table Conference. He said, I recognize only 3 communities, namely Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs. These are the only 3 communities that will have a political recognition in the Constitution. But the Christians or the Anglo-Indians or the scheduled caste will have no place in the Constitution. They must merge themselves in the general community. That was the stand that he had taken. Well, all his friends, I know, you see, were asking him how foolish was his attitude. His own friends had quarreled with him on this subject, that if you are prepared to give a special representation to the Sikhs and special representation to the Muslims, who are 1,000 times superior in strength and political and economic stamina, how can you deny it to the scheduled caste or to the Christian? He always used to say, oh, you don't understand our problem. That's all he was saying. Alexander even, who was a great friend of his, had a serious quarrel with him, as he told me. Then that French woman, who was his disciple, I forget her name now, she also had a great quarrel with him. That we don't understand this attitude. Either you say, we won't give anything to anybody. Let there be just a common role. Then we can understand that that's a democratic thing. Go on saying that you will give it to the Muslims and you give it to the Sikhs, but not to the scheduled caste, seems absurd. He could give no answer. So we suggested this method. He also didn't, in the beginning, when he wrote a letter, Ramsay, he said, no, the scheduled caste should have nothing. no representation, you see. Then his own friend said to him, this was asking for too much. You see, nobody would support you in this matter. Then Malviya and others came to me and said, well, could you not help us to solve this problem? You see, I said, well, I don't want to solve this problem by sacrificing what we have been able to get from the British Premier.
So you went to Poona.
As I said, I suggested alternative formula. And that formula was that I am not prepared to give up the separate electorate, but I am prepared, you see, to modify the thing in this way, namely that the candidates who would stand in the final election on behalf of the scheduled caste should be first elected by the scheduled caste themselves, sort of a primary election, and that they should elect 4 people, 4, and the 4 then should stand in the general electorate, and let the best one come, see, so that we get some assurance that you don't put up your own nominees, but that we do get people who will express our voice in the parliament. That Mr. Gandhi had to accept, so he accepted that. Of course, we had the benefit of it only in one election, in 1937. There you will see that the Federation swept the poll. Gandhi was not able to get a single candidate of his party elected.
Well, did he bargain very hard at the end of his fast?
Oh, of course. He bargained and bargained. I said nothing doing. I am prepared to save your life, provided you do not make hard terms. But I am not going to save your life at the cost of the life of my people. This is too much. How much I have labored in all this, I know very well. And I am not going to sacrifice your whim. I sacrifice our people's interest just for the sake of satisfying. Yours is a whim. How can one day's common election alter the situation? Simply cannot alter the situation.
Was it Gandhi who was too impatient of the Congress party? Was he?
No, personally, I do not know how suddenly Mr. Attlee agreed, you see, to give independence. That's a matter of secret which Mr. Attlee one day, I think, will disclose in his autobiography. How he came to that, you see, nobody ever expected. This is such a sudden change of front. Nobody ever expected. It seems to me, from the analysis that I make about it, there are 2 things which I think led, you see, to the Labour Party to take this decision. One is the national army that was raised by Subashchandrabose. The British had been ruling this country in the firm belief that whatever may happen, you see, in this country, whatever the politician may do, you see, they will never be able, you see, to change the loyalty of the soldier. That was the one prop on which they were carrying on their administration. Now that thing was completely dashed to pieces. You see, when they found that even the soldier was being seduced, you see, and to form a party or a battalion to blow off the British. Then I think the British came to the conclusion that if they were to rule India, the only basis on which they could rule was the maintenance of the British army.